Okay, I'm Kate Scow, and I'm going to kick off this afternoon session, which I think is going to be a little bit different, looking at social and economic values of soil biodiversity. And I'm going to actually just focus on social cultural aspects of soil biodiversity. We have a lot of interesting other talks in this session that will focus more on the economics. And I come to this having worked in Uganda for about 5 years with smallholder farmers and working in California running a large research facility and interacting a lot with farmers there as well, and facing the big chasm between the scientists and the farmers. And with this disconnect, we are generating all this science, and it seems to be of little use to the farmers. The farmers wonder what we're doing. There's just a lot that has to happen to bridge that gap and get different kinds of conversations going about that. And I think part of it is going to be through looking at values. You know, what is it that we as scientists are valuing? What is it that farmers are valuing, and not come with preconceived ideas about that. So, to start off, what I'm going to do is talk first that soil and biodiversity are inextricably linked, and we're often talking about the same theme when we're talking about soil and soil biodiversity, at least from a microbiologist's point of view. How do we define social cultural services? Farmers' views on soil and soil biodiversity, looking at historical relationships, eroding relationships, and rebuilding relationships. Then pulling it together through this framework for developing these metaphors for valuing social and cultural aspects of ecosystem services, and then thinking a little bit about what are opportunities for the allies of soil biodiversity to engage in that, and that's you. So agriculture has a lot of soil biology providing services. You know all about it. We've been looking at this all week. Most of this biodiversity is taken for granted. A lot of it is not utilized nor fostered, that we don't know about or we don't think about, and maybe we don't use it as well as we could. And there's been a degradation of the relationship between soil and humanity, and we've seen this degradation in this relationship that was there in the past, more so in agricultural unsustainability and environmental and societal consequences of again, this lost relationship. And consequences can be direct, really obvious things like erosion, but there's lots of indirect consequences that are far more extensive, and you can see this in communities and in definitely in other environmental degradations. So connecting to soil's life, I am posing this thesis is critical to restoring our relationship with soil. You are going to be restoring a relationship with the life in the soil, not just the soil. And I say this, whether it's soil biodiversity or because soil is alive. I don't think we're going to have time to talk about this, but I think this is really interesting when you start to talk with farmers. Are they really caring about the soil biodiversity, or are they caring about, is soil alive? And those are two different things that are not trivially different, that I think there's a lot of interesting discussion that we need to have around this. And public support and policy change will not happen by science alone. I think we all know that, right? I think we know that it's going to require engaging with the people who care about this, stakeholders. Soil biodiversity, this is from people in this audience. It's a beautiful new paper showing you a whole lot of biodiversity. If you squint really hard, you can see archaea and bacteria and fungi in there as well. They're there, and it's a beautiful picture, but it's lacking the soil. Of course, you wouldn't be able to see it if the soil was there. But I really want to underscore that soil and its biodiversity are inextricably linked, and commingled. And often when we're talking about soil, we are talking about soil biodiversity. When we're talking about soil biodiversity, we're often talking about other things going on in the soil. They are so commingled. So you can't really just pull out the biodiversity and talk about it and be talking really about the soil. And it's difficult to consider one without the other. The organisms are constantly modifying the soil. The soil is feeding back in what the organisms are doing and where they're living. And separating the two, I guess I'm really beating on this, is reductionism at its finest is to pull them apart. Though you might have reasons to do this. So everyone knows Hans Jenny, right? Sort of one of the fathers of soil science. And I put him on as a co-author in this paper, actually. I'm using some of his quotes. They're pretty early on, but they're amazing what he said. Like he said, soil organisms consume oxygen from soil air and give off CO2. And the summation of all these respirations characterize the metabolism of a soil individual. Hence, I designate soil as a living system. I mean, really beautiful early insights. And many ecologists glibly designate soil as the abiotic environment of plants. He wrote this in 1986, a phrase that gives me the creeps, he said. And looking at root soil boundary under electron microscope, you can't tell where the biotic part ends and the abiotic part begins. And this is my quote: soil defies the boundary between life and death. I love that about it. Okay, and this is just a picture to show this point where we have a sustainable ag system we want to have come out of these services, which are nutrient use efficiency and water use efficiency and carbon sequestration. And that's going to be coming from soil biodiversity here, plant soil biodiversity, but not on their own, not without a lot of interactions with the soil structural and physical chemical processes, and then these cycles and processes that are going on. That's this wedding of the life and the physical processes in the soil that are going to generate these services that we care about. So very intimately linked. So Wendell Berry, getting now to the ecosystem services and cultural services. Possible to contemplate life of soil without seeing its analogy to the life of the spirit. So how do we define social cultural value in the context of ecosystem services? This is not simple and straightforward at all. And the more I started to look at this, the more I realized how much people are just very frantically working on this, because it's sort of been thrown out as an idea, but what does it mean? There's a lot of work being done in by social scientists to understand it. So there's some contentious sort of arguing about it. The Millennium Assessment was who threw down the glove. They said cultural services are non-material benefits that people obtain from ecosystems through spiritual enrichment, cognitive development, reflection, recreation, and aesthetic experiences, like a mixed bag of all these different kinds of things that are all thrown into one category, which makes it then really hard to talk about cultural services. A really mixed bag. And they don't fit so well with the other ecosystem services because they're so diverse. Some of them overlap with other ecosystem services, and it's often not meaningful to attach economic value to these. It may never be reasonable to do it. So where I really got a lot of help on this, and I worked with social scientists and anthropologists, was from this work of Chan, where here is a framework for looking at what are these cultural and social systems. And you can see here's our good old Millennium Assessment ecosystem services: provisioning, regulating, supporting, and then here's cultural. And here's all these things like what? Running your dirt bikes over soil? Outdoor? I mean, that's one kind of cultural service combined with like ceremonial and artistic. You know, it's a real mixed bag. And those are services, and then what Chan did was then take subsistence as being another one. That's like making a life, making a living, and then broke that up into benefits. So services are then lead to benefits. They support benefits. And here we can see all these different benefits that come in this subsistence category, which are material, aesthetic, your place, your heritage, your spiritual underpinnings, inspiration, your knowledge, existence, what you're passing on to your children. What is your flexibility? What are your choices that you have? Social capital and cohesion, identity, employment. All these kinds of things are all benefits that are coming from these social services. And here's where then the values come in. And so the values, I'm not even listing them all here, but they're like a different set altogether, which are the preferences, principles, and virtues we uphold as individuals and groups that come out of the benefits. And the benefit doesn't map on a value. A value collects together different benefits into things. Okay, so this is, sort of a different way of looking at things and a different kind of science than a lot of us are used to doing. So our approach, this project is looking at smallholder farmers in particular, and why. It's because they're direct users with potentially large impacts on soil. Already think about soil biodiversity quite a bit. It's not esoteric topic to them. And the part of this is a larger study that we're conducting, but the part that I'm talking about today is this question: is soil alive? And valuing, and what is your personal relationship with soil? Co-authors on this project are people who are in anthropology, community development, ecology, soil science, and agronomy, who collaborate with smallholder farmers in different places all over the world. So I brought together a large group of people to work on this. And what we did was, so far, this is a work in progress, semi-structured interviews with farmers in Peru, Colombia, Bolivia, Ecuador, Mexico, Uganda, Northern California. And about 40% were females, just wanted to put that in. Here are the co-authors, just so you see who they are, out in the field in Uganda and in Bolivia and in Colombia and in California. Just so you see some faces, and here are some of the farmers that were part of these interviews, that carried out some of these interviews. So I'm going to give you quotes that came out of some of these interviews. So the first thing that we're looking at is what are some of these historical relationships with soil. So in Mexico, is soil alive? People loved being asked this question. That's a pretty question, this woman said. It made people really happy to answer this question. I like it because the earth's alive, it gives food to trees, we live off the soil. The earth is alive because it's what gives us life. It's just this continuity between the life and the soil, what you eat, who you are. In Ecuador, of course, in Latin America, it's always no-brainer, soil's alive. We trust in nature, when we put a seed in soil, our trust gives us a product, something to eat from our faith. That's how we can eat. Another person said, not only for us, but soil produces for birds that God's put here. Birds don't plant or harvest, but regardless, at the end of the year, they have food because the soil gives it to them. In Ecuador, soil is Mother Earth, Pachamama, part of everything, religion, nature, society. She's the exact same as a human being. We make small sacrifices to feed and give drink to the land. In Bolivia, came from the soil, return to the soil when we die, so we are the soil. In Uganda, of course, soil is life. All you see depends on the soil. And here, soil life was related to fertility in Uganda very, very strongly. If something grows, that means soil is alive. If soil fails to produce, it doesn't have life. And here's this loan thing. The soil is giving us a loan in its food that it produces, and we have to pay that loan back. We have to put something back in the soil because of that. Here's this mortality thing. Traditional song, whomever lives shall wear the skin of soil, meaning that's your death. You're wearing a skin of soil, and you will go back to soil after you live, and you can rest there. And then before you drink water, pour on some in the soil so your ancestors can drink as well. And then eroding relationships. So there's a lot of places where these relationships with soils are falling apart. In Ecuador, we're destroying soils our ancestors took care of us. We haven't protected them. and we have to improve it or soil won't go on living. In Uganda, not much life in soil because of continuous cultivation. Again, this yield, they're looking at the crop growth. It's not looking good. The life is not there. In Mexico, fascinating stuff. Since government started to hand out seed fertilizer herbicide subsidies, we've lost our old ways, and now the soil is addicted. It's an addict to these inputs because the inputs have been given in a vacuum to them. You know, just start doing this, grow these seeds, these fertilizers. And now the soil is not dependable where it used to be very dependable. Through our disrespect, the soils are now sick. And then how do we know soil? How do we treat soil knowing it's alive? This woman farmer was really hard on herself. We treat it badly. We burn it and give it chemicals just for ourselves. And when we treat it like this, it no longer wants to give to us. Now, rebuilding the relationship in soil. So this is a lot of this is in California, where you know in California we have big industrial scale agriculture. It's already sort of gone the old ways, and people are interested in bringing back different ways of farming, particularly the organic farmers. But we also have some interviews with conventional ones. I've been farming for 25 years. I wake up every morning feeling like I know less. And less is more, and the less I touch, the better it is. You know, these really interesting views about soil. Another person, what's soil to me? It's definitely my sanctuary, it's my real estate, you know, it's my way of living. I also support 40 other farmers on my soil. As farm workers. So he's thinking about that, this other value of the soil. Here's someone who's talking as a steward, who wants to make sure that they're very good stewards of the land, and he reminds his foreman when he's planting that what you're doing today is laying things out for tomorrow. And here's someone who said, I think soil is part of life cycle, and what you sow in your life and what you sow on your soil, it comes back to you. Made this analogy between their own life and soil. So all these different attitudes. Can I know what time it is? 10 minutes more? Okay. I think I can't play you this clip. It's 10 minutes more until discussion, or 10 minutes more, period? 10 minutes more total. Okay, I'm sorry I can't play you this clip. What? It's a 5-minute clip. Play it? Okay. Play it.
My approach is respecting the soil and all the life in it. That's what all our operations are geared toward, and this is all the way through, whether it's watering, fertilizing, cultivating, crops, everything's geared toward keeping the system healthy, and the system being the soil food web and the life in the soil. All what we do is we try and leave an area. Because I'm organic, I need to till some because we have a lot of weed pressure. But we only try and till a rim around most all our stuff's on 60-inch beds, and the rest of it, you know, we kind of do see it as a house for all the life. You get a shovelful and you flip it over, and you just get and it just goes whop, and it stays that way. That ground's lifeless, okay? And you're going to have problems in all facets. You're going to have fertility problems because your roots aren't going to develop as much, and you're going to have water problems because it's tight, so when it gets wet, you're going to drown out the roots and you're going to kill the plant. So everything you have to do, you have to be almost a better farmer in a sense, but you haven't really been a better farmer because you created this situation to start with. But also all facets of your management of the crop get more difficult with the worse the soil health is. It just cracks me up is I get these brochures from equipment companies. Well, all the brochures are dealing with gargantuan tractors pulling humongous rippers and rollers, you know, twice the size of my truck. Well, why? I mean, and this is being sent out to all California farmers. In other words, this is the way the problem is solved, is that the soil structure is gone, and so it does set up. So you have to come in with this gigantic equipment to bust it back up to get aeration to start the whole system again. And then you tighten it all up again the next year, and then you bring all the big heavy equipment in again. It's a vicious cycle that instead of going, well, why is this ground so tight to start with? Why do we need a giant tractor and ripper and roller? It's wet too. It's
damp enough,
yeah. By putting all emphasis on the soil, I don't have any serious problems. I have mostly pluses on all facets. And the disease and insect problems are gone. Fertility problems I don't really have. Irrigation problems aren't very much. So all of that adds up to good quality and reasonable yields. And the driver of the whole thing is taking care of the soil. And then once you sort of plant it, you kind of back off and just let the soil do what it does. We never want to put anything too much. We don't want too much water. We don't want too much fertilizer. We don't want too dense of a planting. Okay, and so it's just creating an environment that we're not forcing things. We're trying to go with the soil, with the environment, instead of willing it to as big of a crop as we possibly can get this year. Forcing our will on the soil, changing the soil structure, beating it up, sucking it dry of every nutrient possible. That smells pretty good. The analogy I was giving was looking at our body in the same ways that soil should be looked at. So like for ourselves, are we better off eating an orange or taking a pill of vitamin C? So both will work. In the short run, vitamin C will be fine if you're, say, fighting a cold or whatever. But the overall health, what's better? Well, what's better is the orange because of all the other ingredients to it, the fiber, it gives your body strength in different ways. And so in the long run, you'll build up your own immunity, per se, to colds or what have you, because you're going to have stronger health. It's the same thing on the soil. You just give it a shot of nitrogen, or do you build it up? Do you put in cover crops? Do you put in compost? Are you timely? You don't destroy the soil structure so the whole microbial system is healthy. And then it can take care of itself. That's my corny analogy. In our farming practices, we solve the problems before they come, because it's very hard to solve, organically right now. If you start having tomato spotted wilt and things like this, what do you put on? There is an entrust, but the repair problems, it's much easier to not even have the problem develop. So that's all our emphasis, and that's what drives, and that's why we're soil driven, okay? Because if the soil is healthy, we don't seem to have the problems that normal farming has. And that's why I'm gung-ho on soil health.
And he's very gung-ho on soil health. He's an extremely successful farmer, 1,500 acres, 22 different fields, very economically viable in an area where most people farm conventionally. So he's not a small-scale, boutique farmer. He really makes it, but has a very interesting attitude and love of soil biology. So pulling this together, relationships between stakeholders and this is a very nice system for pulling together relationships between stakeholders and nature with these alternative metaphors that was developed by Raymond et al. So it's very, very useful for thinking about this. So we have these different metaphors or ways of thinking about our relationship, and this could be with soil biodiversity. We have economic production model, which is like mainstream agriculture. Closed loop production, which is putting ecosystem services in to an agricultural production dominated system. There's stewardship model, where you morally have an imperative to take care of nature as you farm. There's the web of life. This is, I think, how we think often. We are humans in this web of life that includes the soil organisms, but us as well. And then there's the ecocultural community approach, which is what we see more in Latin America and Uganda, where it's not just the farm and it's not just nature, but it's part of cultural traditions as well. And sorry, I don't have time to go through them very much, but the metaphor number one is the most prevalent in US. That's like big industrial scale agriculture. You know, how can we grow more food? You know, how we're going to feed the world. You know how people always talk about that? That's definitely this like production dominated based thinking, where soil isn't fed chemical inputs. You don't have a larger context. The closed loop production one is this ecosystem service oriented type production that might include payment for ecosystem services. Stewardship metaphor, that's common among US organic farmers. They're stewards of the land, which some people find as a repulsive idea, as, you know, that you would steward over nature. The web of life metaphor, I think, is common among soil scientists, but I think Scott Park has that as well. And then the ecocultural one is prevalent in the developing world, but that metaphor number one, that production one, is now being just shoved down their throats in a vacuum, right? Just shoved down without any sort of connection or thinking about their own context. And that's why things don't work often. So comparisons of these different metaphors can be really helpful in bringing people together and thinking about what they value and maybe coming up with some decisions on new production methods and also policy. I'm not going to talk about indicators, but that's a fascinating thing to talk about that's really important to this meeting. So, and I think I've got to just say, what can we do? We can try to, Hans Jenny says, be a little bit less boring in how we talk about our science. We make soil seem lifeless. I don't think you do, but we want to talk about more openly. People might like us better if we were more exciting. And our isolation actually keeps us from growing, because if we put ourselves out there and thought more emotionally about what we did, it might actually feed back into us and how we do our science as well. And collaborate with authors, artists. I worked on Symphony of the Soil. I was a technical advisor on that film, but there's these wonderful new vehicles for getting across ideas about soil and soil biodiversity. So appealing to the cultural aspects of the general public, the cultural values of the general public. This is terrible, but you know, this is a thing that they've done for soil. It's not terrible, but it's part of a series of looking at different parts of nature. It's a wonderful campaign, but soil really seems like a victim in it. I don't approve this message at all, but you can go and watch it on YouTube. Soil seems like a whiny creature. And then the other thing, I just like to say this, we need to promote soil biodiversity as something that we strive for in agriculture. And we always give prizes for like big pumpkins. Why not a prize for the most biodiverse, biggest biomass soil? Get a blue ribbon for that. So I will stop there and take any questions.
So we have time for at least 2 questions. There.
Okay. Is it working? Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. So, Kate, would you care to comment? You're talking a lot about the rural context here, but then a comment on the role of the urban system in disconnecting humans from soil.
Okay, I'm sorry. Say the urban.
Yeah. So, what is the you know, we have a greater proportion of the population now in urban environments.
Yeah.
So the disconnect. Could you care to comment on that?
Yeah, I think there's a tremendous opportunity for reaching the urban sector. You know, food is this amazing portal or gateway drug into soil, or however you want to say it. Food opens up the door and makes people get interested in soil and get interested in soil biodiversity. So that's a strong connection. The other one is the human gut microbiome is just making people really fascinated about, you know, their organisms, and the analogies between soil and our bodies are so powerful that, again, it's a way to like connect people if our goal is to try to get some excitement and new ideas about the importance of soil and soil biodiversity. If that's our goal, I think those are 2 really good ways of doing that. You know, it may not be. I mean, I've given up. I want people just to start with the soil. Like, damn it, soil's fantastic, isn't it? You know, just like, don't like talk about this other stuff. Let's get to the heart of it. It's the soil. And I realize that doesn't work for a lot of people, and they want to come through food or through other ways. And I'm okay with that now. Yeah.
Hi. Thanks for your inspiring talk. I was wondering, because you mentioned those 4 or 5 metaphors, so to speak, about soil. And of course, metaphors one, which is focused on the economic value of soil, taken alone to the extremes that is happening in many parts of the world, is of course harmful. And I was wondering, as soil ecologists, do we not have a bit of responsibility towards exacerbating that with our recent emphasis on the ecosystem service concept? Because ecosystem service is a good concept for some aspects, but it also carries a bit of a teleological bias, because it lacks that, you know, ecosystem exists to serve us. So what's your opinion about that?
Yeah, I think that it's interesting that the reason that author came up with that was to try to break out of that ecosystem service dominated approach and put that as one kind of metaphor. That would be one approach people might want to take. But that, oh my God, that's me. And now I can't speak. No, but that's where like the stewardship is another approach, or you know, which is another option that isn't about ecosystem services and payment for that, and like that the eco-cultural one as well. They're different vehicles for talking about things that people want to get together and talk about, but don't want to bring only one paradigm to. You know, like the ecosystem service, because that's just one paradigm. And I think that's what I like about this paper and that approach, and I think we could come, you know, we may be obsessed with that web of life. You saw that, it's a little community ecology drawing at the bottom of it, you know, and think about that, you know, and come and bring that to the table and discuss about it. And then people could figure out ways to combine things, or, you know, I think it's a vehicle for having conversations with people who think about things very differently.